we do the abbreviated prayers, right?
Yeah,
just the verse. Okay. Dorje Janchen Telo Naroga Marpa Mela Chiche Kampopa Dusan Sheja Kunkin Karmapa Chiche Chunge Gyupa Zenanda Drita Sasum Paden Drupaso Salam Chakya Chelan Manye Name Drogun Dapo Kagila Soa Nepso Kajula Mana Gyubadzino Namdar Chengilo Shenlo Gongi Kampa Somparshi Zeno Kunla Charshen Mebana Zebe Tajbe Gonchena Nikushempa Mebar Jinjilo Mugu Gongi Obo Sompashi Mema Tego Jepe Lamala Myundu Sovanepe Gonchela Chememugu Kewa Jinjilo Yeme Gongi Mushe Sompashi Gansha Tope Novo Sonade Mache de Ganchope Conchela Onjagodan Jawad Jinjelo Namto Mo Chuku Sombashi Chiryam Ayen Chiryam Charwala Magaropa Chawe Conchela Orde Yeme Topa Jinjilo Kewa Kuntu Yonda Amata Rame Chike Pala Long Chuching Sadalam Gyoten Razone Dorje Changye Gopam Yodosho.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice break. We'll continue with our topic, A Precious Human Life, this afternoon. And like before, I'll try to build in some discussion questions. And then at the end of this afternoon session, I'll try to set aside some more time for the general Q&A, as I know sometimes people can only attend one day of the weekend. So this morning, we reviewed the 8 freedoms and advantages of a precious human life. And then following that, we reviewed Longchenpa's 16 additional conditions that obstruct Dharma practice. Now, to put the rarity of obtaining human life into perspective, we can review traditional analogies. So if you were to ask, how many beings enjoy all the freedoms and riches? The answer would be startlingly few. There are many analogies that the Buddha presented to express how rare it is to attain a precious human life. And Bardor Rinpoche illustrates this by describing a blind turtle. Maybe some of you have heard this analogy. If not, it's a fun one. The Buddha said that it is more difficult for a being to obtain a precious human life than it would be for a turtle coming up from the depths of the ocean to put its head by chance through an opening of a wooden yoke tossed around by huge waves on the surface. Imagine the whole cosmos of 1,000,000,000 universes as a vast ocean. Floating upon it is a yoke, a piece of wood with a hole in it that can be fixed around the horns of an oxen. This yoke, tossed hither and thither by the waves, sometimes eastward, sometimes westward, never stays in the same place for an instant. Deep down in the depths of the ocean lives a blind turtle who rises up to the surface only once every 100 years. That the yoke and the turtle might meet is extremely unlikely. The yoke itself is inanimate. The turtle is not intentionally seeking it out. The turtle, being blind, has no eyes with which to spot the yoke. If the yoke were to stay in one place, there might be a chance of their meeting, but it is continually on the move. If the turtle were to spend its entire time swimming around the surface, it might perhaps cross paths with the yoke, but it surfaces only once every 100 years. The chances, therefore, of the yoke and the turtle coming together are extremely small. Nevertheless, by sheer chance, the turtle might still just slip its neck into the yoke. But it is even more difficult than that, the sutras say, to obtain a human existence with the freedoms and advantages. There is another analogy, which is that the difficulty of obtaining human birth is also compared to that of getting dried peas thrown at a smooth wall to stick to it, or that of balancing a pile of peas on the tip of an upright needle, which is hard enough with even a single pea. Then, in terms of number, there are far fewer human beings than there are any other being of the 6 realms. Bardor Rinpoche also provides comparisons in terms of number. He says, "It is said that there are as many beings in hell as specks of dust in the whole world, as many pretas as particles of sand in the Ganges, as many animals as grains in a beer barrel, and as many asuras as snowflakes in a blizzard, but that gods and humans are as few as particles of dust on a fingernail." So we should take stock of this and recognize that our current existence is extremely rare. Compared to all the other sentient beings, we have the freedoms, advantages, and conducive circumstances that support our progress towards Buddhahood. And that is something that we should not waste. As the Tibetan saying goes, "Chiwa mitapa," which means the time of death is uncertain and all things are impermanent, including our current conducive circumstances, which we know will change after we pass from this life, and we're not sure what it will change into. Patrul Rinpoche also stresses that attaining a precious human life is by no means a coincidence. He reminds us, these freedoms and advantages do not come by chance or coincidence. They are the result of an accumulation of merit and wisdom built up over many kalpas. The great scholar Trokpa Gyaltsen says, this free and favored human existence is not the result of your resourcefulness. It comes from the merit you have accumulated. To have obtained human life only to be wholly involved in evil activities without the least notion of Dharma is to be lower than the lower realms. As Jetsun Milarepa, Tibet's famous yogi saint, said to the hunter, Gompo Dorje, to have the freedoms and fortunes of human birth is usually said to be precious, but when I see someone like you, it doesn't seem precious at all. Nothing has as much power to drag you down to the lower realms as a human life. What you do with it right now is up to you alone. Quote, used well, this body is our raft to freedom. Used badly, this body anchors us to samsara. This body does the bidding of both good and evil. It is through the power of all the merit you have accumulated in the past that you have now obtained this human life, complete with its 18 freedoms and advantages. To neglect the one essential thing, the supreme Dharma, and instead to just spend your life acquiring food and clothes and indulging the 8 worldly concerns would be a useless waste of those freedoms and advantages. How ineffectual to wait until death is upon you and then beat your breast with remorse. For you will have made the wrong choice. As it says in the Way of the Bodhisattva, thus, having found the freedoms of a human life, if I now fail to train myself in virtue, what greater folly could there ever be? How more could I betray myself? It's clear that Patrul Rinpoche is urging us to not squander this rare and efficacious human life. He mentions both the 8 ordinary concerns and the way of the Bodhisattva. For reference, it's also listed in the handout, are the 8 ordinary concerns, also known as the 8 worldly concerns, which are hope for pleasure and fear of pain, hope for good reputation and fear of bad reputation, hope for praise and fear of blame, and then hope for gain and fear of loss. It is taught that the purpose of the Buddha's Dharma is to help us reduce and extinguish our attachment and aversion. As you can see, the 8 worldly concerns are entirely driven by attachment and aversion. Steered by them, we are constantly pushed back and forward by seeking what is conventionally considered good for us and pushing away what is conventionally considered bad for us. At the heart of this, of course, is self-cherishing and self-centeredness. Being preoccupied with the 8 worldly concerns, a person will behave selfishly and will not be practicing the Dharma that seeks to uproot clinging to the self. I'd like to ask, does anyone here feel pushed around by the 8 worldly concerns? And is there a pair in particular that causes you any trouble?
For example, right now, I feel like if I share something too personal, I might get a bad reputation. So that's fear of bad reputation.
Sure. Yeah.
The hope for gain and fear of loss. I'm in the process of trying to have a new relationship with money and finances in my life, because I've always sort of come to this point of scarcity instead of abundance. And so I'm learning about that I have enough, I just have to learn how to allocate it better.
Mhm.
So there's always been this hope that I'm gonna have, like, all of a sudden everything will be great. And then there's fear that like all of a sudden I'm like gonna lose everything and lose my house.
Mhm.
So coming to the Dharma, I've decided that I'm gonna try to just make peace and realize that I am coming, there is abundance and I have enough, I just have to like manage it.
Mhm.
So that's my,
That's a great example. Yeah. I found this interesting book of Tibetan folk tales the other day, and one of them is about the origination story of beings on this in this world system, Jambudvipa, where apparently we were all, or at least the first beings on this world were actually like gods, and they emitted light and they had everything they needed, and then over time, they started to get greedy, and then it was due to greed that they started losing all of their abilities and all of the innate wealth that they had because they felt like they needed to seek something else. And then in seeking that, they started to lose the light that they had and the natural, like replenishing whatever energy they had that they didn't need to rely on food. And then down to when they started stealing from each other. And so apparently that's kind of like something like the fall, I suppose. But yeah, the feeling that there isn't enough, that we need more, and that we're willing to, I don't know, take it and things like that. That the initial feeling itself is really like the problem. Oh, sure.
So, I have is hope like an aspiration? Or is an aspiration more like a vow?
I guess hope and aspiration are closely related. This one about hope and fear, huh? Is that even there? Well, hope, all of these start with hope. Yeah.
I'm just curious. I have this desire. First of all, I have a realization, more because of my age, of impermanence. So because of that, I want to accomplish certain things while I'm still in this physical body. And one of the things I wanted to accomplish is I did a series of a year in my mother's life, 1924. It took me 3 years to paint this series. And so next year, it'll be 100 years old. So I wanted to take photographs of the book that I have that's 100 years old, and the paintings, and have a show at Taste Buds. And there's all these obstacles. It's before I had a show at Taste Buds many years ago, and there were no obstacles. Everything just so. So the message of this show is not just about a year of my mother's life, which was kind of interesting, but it's about how human nature has not changed. I mean, lots of things have changed, but human nature remains the same. So she does everything we still do to this day. She explores, she travels, and so forth and so on. And when I tell this message to people, people don't seem to understand the depth of it, so it's frustrating to me. So I'm getting in touch with someone who understands, even though I'm English, I was born in the United States, I don't know the language very well. I'm not a verbal person. So I'm hoping to get in touch with a friend of mine that has the gift of words so that he can take my idea and put it in words in such a way that it's meaningful. And I guess what I feel is like, okay, I think it's meaningful, but will anybody else think it's meaningful? It's a little bit like, for me, Dharma is highly meaningful. But how, I know that it's through, for instance, I've learned so much from watching the lamas and people that have been living in Dharma for a while, and I see their example. And so part of this is example, but I don't know how to do that. So I don't know if I'm making myself clear. If this is the question you asked, I'm not sure I'm answering it, but I'm just expressing this hope that I have, that I would like to, before I go on to the next phase, I would like to be able to express deep meanings, meaningful things. And I have this one way of doing it, which is through this work that I did, but I'd like to be able to do it in many more ways. So that's my aspiration. I guess it's not really, it's a wish more than an aspiration.
Well, that sounds like it's going to be a beautiful art show. And it makes perfect sense to want to express those things. However, who knows how other people will perceive it? That's the thing we have no control over. And I think it's that uncertainty that can cause a lot of anxiety. Because what we're assuming there is we want people to understand it the way that we understand it. We want them to find it meaningful in the way that we find it meaningful. And then there's worry that they might not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess that is still, maybe it's pride. I don't know. I'm not sure if it goes back to one of the kleshas, or or not trusting Dharma to make whatever happens is what's supposed. Is Dharma happen? It's life or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. That's why I guess I'm meditating on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this sounds like a very familiar type of situation. And I think it has something to do with our expectations and how we hope that things will be received, or how we hope people will take things that are important to us. I feel there may be a relationship there that I am going to speak about. But thank you very much for sharing that example. Yeah. I often find that the extent to which we suffer is equivalent to the extent that we care about those 8 worldly concerns. And for me, I often feel a lot of worry and stress, which usually has to do with wanting, for example, a good reputation versus not wanting a bad reputation. I find that I have a lot of hope and fear surrounding Dharma talks, for example, because I want to do a good job. And of course, it's good to want to do a good job. But the difference is, do I want to do a good job for me, or do I want to do a good job for others? Anyone can fall prey to the 8 worldly concerns to varying degrees, even spiritual teachers. Therefore, it's recommended to always check one's motives to see if we're not actually being steered by the 8 worldly concerns instead of bodhicitta. Perhaps you'll find that the mind and its habitual tendencies are very strong, subtle, and elusive. It's always slipping back into survival techniques, such as self-cherishing in order to preserve itself. This is really the aim of the body and the brain. And we, as their master, have to recircuit the messaging, and we have to do this repeatedly in order to form new, compassionate, and altruistic habits. Patrul Rinpoche urges us to make the right decisions now that we have this precious human life. He exhorts us by saying, "This present life, therefore, is the turning point at which you can choose between lasting goodness or lasting evil. If you do not make use of it right now to seize the citadel of the absolute nature within this lifetime, in lives to come, it will be very hard to obtain such freedom again." As a measure of how much this practice has truly convinced us, we should be like Geshe Chengawa, who spent all his time practicing and never even slept. Geshe Dompa said to him, "You'd better rest, my son. You'll make yourself ill." "Yes, I should rest," Chengawa replied. "But when I think of how difficult it is to find the freedoms and advantages that we have, I have no time to rest." He recited 900 million mantras of Miyowa and did without sleep for the whole of his life. We should meditate until exactly that sort of conviction arises in our minds. Oh no. Okay. So that's an example of conviction that Patrul Rinpoche leaves us with. Perhaps we are not burning with the fire that is driving Geshe Chengawa, who apparently had no time even for sleep. But while we might not practice like him, at least not at this time, we can cheer him on and be inspired by his example. It seems like he really took the teachings on the preciousness of the human life to heart. He didn't want to waste this good opportunity, and neither should we. Of course, we have to practice in a way that is compatible with our current capacity. It is very important to respect that. We should understand that Geshe Chengawa was a very learned master who was a monastic and lived in a monastery among like-minded people and likely practiced all his life. He was a professional practitioner. To put this into perspective, the amount of training that an Olympic athlete carries out every day is extraordinary. Imagine the swimming routine of Olympic gold medalist Michael Phelps. Just as it would be impossible and inappropriate to expect someone who is learning how to swim to carry out the swimming routine of Michael Phelps, we can't expect ourselves to carry out the practice routines of professional practitioners. We have to begin where we are and steadily build up our abilities. I have an example about this in terms of health and nutrition. I went to see a nutritionist for the first time, and she recommended some changes to my diet and my exercise routine. And she recommended reducing my caloric intake and making my diet more balanced. And then added exercise would also help to burn calories. I decided to go all in and changed all my meals to salads. I was also exercising more. Then one day, out of nowhere, I had a shoulder spasm that landed me in the hospital for the first time since I was born. And that was last year that this happened. While she did not suggest that I should change all my meals to salad, I was the one who went to that extreme, and then it ended up being unsustainable for me. And I'm someone who usually consumes fats from milks and cheeses and things like that. But I ended up avoiding these foods completely. And so instead of a steady decrease of a more balanced food diet, I ended up making some type of drastic change that ended up harming me. And so it would have been wiser if I used some more discretion and was more tempered about the changes I wanted to make. And in addition, in trying to reach some of these types of body goals, I may have been making unrealistic expectations. And unsustainable changes for me. So I was wondering, does anyone have experience with this in terms of their spiritual practice? Have you ever tried to bite off more than you can chew and then had to readjust? Yeah,
Oh,
always.
Right.
I call it just being myself.
Mhm.
I'm learning now.
Mhm.
It's horrible.
Oh, well, I mean, in terms of spiritual practice, I think enthusiasm is great. And like, it is good to try to do as much as you can, but also sometimes that isn't always sustainable either. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Well, it's very important. Go ahead.
I was so into meditating and needed to sit, the posture, and needed to sit in ways that were, and did not listen to my body for a long time. And there's this strange thing where everybody would kind of be like, "Oh, your legs will give in, like, they'll work it out." And it's like, but I would sit through immense amounts of pain that was most likely my body telling me, it's like, bro, like, calm down, maybe do 20, like, just do 20, 30 minutes instead of trying to do an hour. And you don't need to sit exactly, kind of Vajra style or anything like that, or maybe sit in a chair sometimes. In the beginning, that was very difficult to let that go. And so I did not listen to my body, and then instead tried to make my like knees and my legs like cooperate by doing like forced yoga and like doing, just all sorts of stretches. And I've become much more tempered now and can sit much more comfortable. It's like strange how I the more I let go of it, then the more that it's just kind of like, I sit for as long as I can, hurts for a little bit, then I get up. It's like, but yeah, in the beginning, that was definitely a big obstacle to get over, how I thought practice needed to be, and would, not listen to my body in the process.
Yeah, that sounds like attachment to maybe an idea,
Sure.
the way that something should be. But it's funny you say that when you kind of let go of your attachment to that it actually got easier.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting relationship. I guess when it doesn't feel like it's such a big deal, then like, I don't know. Also, your body doesn't care either or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a attachment to pain and attachment to pleasure and fear of pain.
Uh-huh.
It had a weird element of that.
Mm-hmm.
The more that I was attached to that whole thing, the more that the pain felt painful. It's like I didn't want the pain to be there. It's like I want to sit.
Mm-hmm.
I want to sit like Milarepa. I want to sit like, why can't I sit like that?
Mm-hmm.
And so.
Yeah, that sounds like it also like causes some frustration.
Yeah,
When you
tight.
can't. Yeah, getting really, getting tight, as they say in Buddhism, in terms of sitting or whatever you do, not too tight, not too loose, just in the middle. And what that middle is something we have to find out for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think attachment to ideas is maybe it can be not only dangerous, but I think it can be lethal. A lot of the times, I find that when people really feel like they can't go on, it's usually because of a really strong attachment to some idea, which they don't have to have. But because the attachment is so strong, they just can't feel like they can live if they don't. meet this idea. So yeah, perhaps even more dangerous than physical harm can be our attachment to ideas. So it's very important to nurture your practice just as we nurture a tiny seed that grows shoots, limbs, leaves, and steadily grows into a sapling. This sapling will grow into a tall and mighty tree that can support countless beings, but it doesn't all happen in one night. In fact, it takes many years. Likewise, we have the potential to grow into mighty practitioners who can help others, and this is done one step at a time. As His Eminence Taisitha Rinpoche has taught, steady progress is what's most important. If we can make even 1% progress towards Buddhahood in each life, then in 100 lifetimes, we would reach Buddhahood. And that's not so bad. In fact, that would actually be pretty quick. It often takes much longer than that to attain Buddhahood, which would mean that whoever this is, whatever these people are, they're making less than 1% progress each life, and perhaps even backsliding at times. So, keeping this in mind, the most important thing is that we're continually trying to improve ourselves and to develop our bodhicitta and build up our capacities. And while we do that, we should be supportive of ourselves and have healthy expectations while we work towards our goal. And if we're doing that, then I would say we're on the right track. So at this point, I'd like to switch gears and turn to the second guiding question of the weekend, which is, what should we do with our precious human life? From a Buddhist perspective, the answer would seem quite simple, which is that we should practice the Dharma and we should live rightly, and which means abandoning what should be abandoned and adopting what should be adopted. His Holiness, the 17th Karmapa, shares a story from his childhood in his book, Traveling the Path of Compassion, this one, about how his parents explained the Dharma to him clearly as a child and how this is very important to do. So I'll share this childhood memory of His Holiness. I would like to tell you a story about something that happened in my life because I think that the strength of our grasping onto a self may depend on our childhood, how we were trained when we were young, and how our parents brought us up. I remember that when I was very small, about 3 or 4 years old, my parents tried to bring me up well and love me, which is the most important. All that they wanted was to give me whatever made me feel happy and loved. This is a very nice way to raise a child, but it also presents opportunities for pride to develop. With this kind of upbringing, whenever some little thing did not go right, a child cries, and the parent immediately responds by trying to do something about it. The parents make an effort to find something that will please the child and give it to them, but they do not explain what they are doing and all the effort they went through. They just give the child what it wants, so the child becomes a little monarch, thinking, whatever I want and like happens. Whatever I don't like and don't want doesn't happen. As a result, even if the child does not feel self-important in the beginning, some arrogance develops. So, in this situation, it is important to give an explanation that opens another perspective. The parents can make it clear to the child that in order to give it something it liked, they had to go to a lot of trouble, which included eliminating all the things the child did not like. If the child clearly understands the reasons why something positive happened, this could help to prevent a strong pride from developing. During autumn in Tibet, animals are killed for their meat. As a young child, I did not like this at all. Maybe there was some compassion involved or maybe fear, but mostly I did not like to see animals being killed. I used to cry and say, "Don't kill them." I would do different things to stop the slaughter, but with no success. In our part of Tibet, an animal is not killed with a knife, but by suffocation, which involves tying up the animal's mouth and legs. When I saw this happening, I wanted to run there and take away all the bonds, but I was too small to untie them. So instead, I would make a big scene by crying. But no matter what I did, I could not prevent what I did not want to happen. Since they could not follow my wishes, my parents explained to me, "We can't follow your wishes. If we didn't kill this animal, we'd have no food. There'd be nothing for you to eat." I did understand that the place my parents lived was very high and vegetables did not grow, and there was nothing else to eat. Turning to Dharma, they also explained the killing from the standpoint of karma. Given our situation, we had no choice, for we were not independent of our karma. Hearing their explanations and reasons helped. I somewhat understood that the killing was done out of a need to survive and that karma played a role. This explanation of karma, however, did not make me happy. Seeing all the reasons why living beings are not independent and why they suffer gave me an even greater reason to be sad. Nevertheless, it is important to use such occasions to teach children on the spot so that when similar situations arise in the future, they can turn to their parents' explanations and understand more clearly. This was certainly beneficial for me, and maybe it can help others as well. Parents do seek to create a wonderful world for their children, but even more splendid is to give them explanations that increase their intelligence and ability to discriminate right from wrong. In Buddhism, we speak of what it is to be given up and what is to be taken up. According to the Dharma, what is most difficult to give up, even if we try very hard, is our ego fixation, this grasping to an I. Therefore, we are guiding our children in the wrong direction if we encourage their self-centeredness. We should teach them what is really useful. For example, parents might grow vegetables and give them to their children. This will help the child temporarily, but not as much as if they actually taught the child how to grow food. In the same way, as Dharma practitioners, especially those who are teachers, we have to take care that in explaining the Dharma to others, we help them understand in a practical and effective way and not one that will reinforce clinging to the self. So, as His Holiness states, a self-centered attitude can bring about pride and other harmful behaviors. And this is further explained in the words of my perfect teacher. In terms of the 10 negative actions to be avoided and the 10 positive actions to be adopted. To list them, the 10 non-virtues are related to body, speech, and mind, the first 3 being non-virtues of the body, the following 4 being non-virtues of speech, and the last 3 being non-virtues of mind. They are taking life, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, lying, sowing discord, harsh speech, worthless chatter, covetousness, wishing to harm others, and wrong views. To open this presentation, Patrul Rinpoche states, what causes us to be reborn in the higher or lower realms of samsara is the good and bad actions that we ourselves have accumulated. Samsara itself is produced by actions and consists entirely of the effects of actions. There is nothing else that consigns us to the higher or lower realms. Neither is it just chance. At all times, therefore, we should examine the effects of positive and negative actions and try to avoid all those that are wrong and take up all those that are right. The first, taking life. Taking life means doing anything intentionally to end the life of another being, whether human, animal, or any other living creature. A warrior killing an enemy in battle is an example of killing out of hatred. Killing a wild animal to eat its flesh or wear its skin is killing out of desire. Killing without knowing the consequences of right and wrong is the belief that it is a virtuous thing to do. This is killing out of ignorance. There are 3 instances of killing that are called acts with immediate retribution because they bring about immediate rebirth in the hell realm, such as the hell realm of ultimate torment, without passing through the intermediate state. And these are killing one's father, killing one's mother, and killing an arhat. Some of us, thinking only of the specific act of killing with our own hands, might imagine that we are innocent of ever having taken life. But to start with, there is no one, high or low, powerful or feeble, who is not guilty of having crushed countless tiny insects underfoot while walking around. More specifically, lamas and monks visiting their benefactors' houses are served the flesh and blood of animals that have been slaughtered and cooked for them. And such is their predilection for the taste of meat that without the least remorse or compassion for the slaughtered beings, they wolf it down with great gusto. In such cases, the negative karmic effect of the slaughter falls on both the benefactor and guest without discrimination. When important people and government officials travel about, wherever they go, innumerable animals are killed for their tea parties and receptions. The rich, as a rule, kill countless animals. All of their livestock, apart from the odd beast here and there, they allow none to die of a natural death, but have them slaughtered one by one as they age. What is more, in the summer, these very cattle and sheep, as they graze, kill innumerable insects, flies, ants, and even little fish and frogs, swallowed down with the grass, crushed under their hooves, or swamped within their dung. The negative karmic result of all these acts comes to the owner as well as the beast. Compared to horses, cattle, and other livestock, sheep are particularly prolific in causing harm. As they graze, they eat all sorts of little animals, frogs, snakes, baby birds, and so on. In summer, at shearing time, hundreds of thousands of insects carried by each sheep in its fleece all die. In winter, at lambing time, no more than half the lambs are kept, and the rest are killed at birth. The mother ewes are used for their milk and to produce lambs until they become too old and exhausted, at which point they are then all slaughtered for their meat and skins. And not a single ram, whether castrated or not, reaches maturity without being slaughtered straight away. Should the sheep have lice, millions of them are killed at a time on each sheep. Anyone who owns a flock of 100 or more sheep can be sure of at least one rebirth in hell. Being that Patrul Rinpoche lived in Tibet, many of his examples are related to animal herders and livestock. However, just as he mentioned, we are all guilty of killing animals, small and large, under our feet, or more deliberately to eat. As we saw in His Holiness the Karmapa's example, within his family, it wasn't possible for them to not eat animals since there was no other food source. At times, we have to make these hard decisions, but it is very important that we understand the consequences of them as well. If we do, then we can make decisions more wisely, in an informed manner, and not heedlessly as if there were no consequences. Never delighting in killing, but doing so sparingly with remorse and lots of prayer for the beings that we have harmed is very important. It's very hard to live this life without harming or killing other beings. And that itself is, what would you say, one of the defects of samsara itself. The next non-virtue of body to be abandoned is taking what is not given. Patrul Rinpoche explains, taking what is not given, in terms of this, there are 3 kinds. taking by force, taking by stealth, and taking by trickery. Taking by force, also called taking by overpowering, this means the forceful seizure of possessions or property by a powerful individual, such as a king, having no legal right to them. It also includes plunder by force of number, as by army, for example. Then there's taking by stealth, which means taking possessions of things secretly, like a burglar, without being seen by the owner. Taking by trickery, this is to take others' goods in a business deal, for example, by lying to the other party, using false weights and measures or other such subterfuges. Nowadays, the idea that in business or in other contexts there is anything wrong with cheating or trickery to get things from others does not occur to us, as long as we are not overtly stealing. But in fact, any profit we may make by deceiving other people is no different from outright theft. In particular, Patrul Rinpoche states, lamas and monks these days see no harm or wrong in doing business. Indeed, they spend their whole lives at it and feel rather proud of their prowess. However, nothing debilitates a lama or monk's mind more than business. Engrossed in his transactions, he feels little inclination to pursue his studies or to work at purifying his obscurations. And anyway, there is no time left for such things. All his waking hours until he lies down to sleep at night are spent poring over his accounts. Any idea of devotion, renunciation, or compassion is eradicated, and constant delusion overpowers him. And to note, if Patrul Rinpoche says this about the monastics, then imagine how much more true it is for lay people. There is an example, a story about Jetsun Milarepa, who arrived one night at a monastery and laid down to sleep in front of the door of a cell. The monk who lived in the cell was lying in bed thinking about how he was going to sell the carcass of a cow that he planned to have slaughtered the next day. I'll get that much for the head. The shoulder blade is worth this much, and the shoulder itself is worth that much, and this much for the knuckles and shins. He went on calculating the value of each and every part of the cow, inside and out. By daybreak, he had not slept a wink, but he had it all worked out except for the price he would ask for the tail. He got up straight away, completed his devotions, and made torma offerings. As he stepped outside, he came across the Jetsun still sleeping and disdainfully railed at him. You claim to be a Dharma practitioner, and here you are still sleeping at this hour. Don't you do any practice or recitations at all? I don't always sleep like this, replied Jetsun Mila. It's just that I spent the whole night thinking about how to sell a cow of mine that's going to be slaughtered. I only got to sleep a little while ago. And so, exposing the monk's hidden shortcomings, he left. Like the monk in the story, those whose lives at the moment are devoted only to business spend day and night totally involved in their calculations. They are so engrossed in delusion that even when death comes, they will die still deluded as ever. Moreover, commerce involves all sorts of negative actions. People who have merchandise to sell, however shoddy in reality, extol its qualities in whatever ways they can think up. They tell outright lies, such as how this or that potential buyer has already offered this much for it, which they had refused, or how they originally bought it for this or that huge sum. Trying to buy something that is already the subject of negotiations between two other people, they resort to slander to provoke disagreement between the two parties. They use harsh words to insult their competitors' wares, to extort debts, and the like. They indulge in worthless chatter by demanding ridiculous prices or haggling for things that they have no intention of buying. They envy and covet other people's possessions, trying their best to be given them. They wish harm on their competitors, wanting always to get the better of them. If they trade in livestock, they are also involved in killing. So, business, in fact, involves all of the 10 negative actions, except perhaps wrong views and sexual misconduct. Then, when their deals go wrong, both sides have wasted their assets, everyone suffers, and traders may end up starving. having brought harm upon both themselves and their counterparts. But should they have some success, however much they make, it is never enough. Even those who get as rich as Vaishyavana still take pleasure in their nefarious business deals. As death finally closes in on them, they will beat their breasts in anguish. And for their entire human life has been spent in such obsession, which now becomes millstones to drag them down to the lower realms. Nothing could be more effective than trade and commerce for piling up endless harmful actions and thoroughly corrupting you. You find yourself continually thinking up ways to cheat people, as though you were looking through a collection of knives and needles for the sharpest tool. Brooding endlessly over harmful thoughts, you turn your back on the bodhicitta ideal of helping others, and your pernicious acts multiply to infinity. Taking what is not given also has to include the four elements already explained for the negative action to be complete. However, any participation, down to merely offering hunters or thieves some food for their expedition, is enough to bring you an equal share of the effect of the evil action of their killing or stealing. I never thought that business and trade could involve so much non-virtue, but I have also not taken the time to scrutinize it. In trying to sell things, sometimes we fib or try to make our products seem better than others, and it's helpful to hear all the potential risks of just doing business, which Patrul Rinpoche really lays out. Then, moving on to the third non-virtue, which is the non-virtue of sexual misconduct. The rules that follow are for lay people. In Tibet, during the reign of the Dharma king Songtsen Gampo, laws based on the 10 positive actions were established, comprising both rules for the laity and rules for the religious community. Here we are referring to those restrictions on behavior destined for lay people who, as householders, should follow an appropriate ethic. Monks and nuns, for their part, are expected to avoid the sexual act altogether. The gravest sexual misconduct is that of leading other people to break their vows. Sexual misconduct also includes acts associated with particular persons, places, and circumstances, masturbation, sexual relations with a person who is married or committed to someone else, or with a person who is free but in broad daylight, during observation of a one-day vow, during illness, distress, pregnancy, bereavement, menstruation, or recovery from childbirth, in a place where the physical representations of the three jewels are present, with one's parents, other prohibited family members, or with prepubescent children, in the mouth, anus, and so on. I think perhaps some of these restrictions might sound kind of uncomfortable to us. Our culture here in America and in the West in general is different from that of Tibet at the time when this was written. I think the most important cautions are to avoid romantic relationships with inappropriate people, such as people who have taken vows of celibacy and people who are not available to have romantic relationships due to pre-existing commitments. Respecting this is very important and will help to support a healthy community. Number 4, lying. Lying is of 3 sorts. There are ordinary lies, major lies, and phony lama's lies. Ordinary lies. These are any untrue statements made with the intention of deceiving other people. Major lies. These are statements such as, for example, there is no benefit in positive actions and no harm in negative ones, that there is no happiness in the Buddha fields and no suffering in the lower realms, or that the Buddhas have no good qualities. They are called major lies because no other lies could have more devastatingly misleading consequences. Then, phony lama's lies. These are all untrue claims to possess such qualities and abilities as, for example, to have attained the bodhisattva levels or to have powers of clairvoyance. Imposters nowadays have more success than true masters, and everyone's thoughts and actions are easy to influence. So, some people declare themselves masters or siddhas in an effort to deceive others. They have had a vision of a certain deity and made thanksgiving offerings to him. they claim, or they have seen a spirit and chastise it. For the most part, these are just phony Lama's lies. So be careful not to believe such cheats and charlatans blindly. Affecting as it does both this life and the next, it is important to place your trust in a Dharma practitioner whom you know well, who is humble, and whose inner nature and outer behavior correspond. For us, I think the ordinary lies are the most relevant. However, it makes me a little nervous about white lies. Number 5, sowing discord. Sowing discord can be either open or secret. Openly sowing discord. This is a strategy often used by people who hold some authority. It consists of creating a rift between people, both present, by openly telling one that the other said something bad about him behind his back, or going on to describe what the first person said or did to harm the second, and then perhaps asking them both why today they are still behaving as if no such thing had happened between them. Secretly sowing discord. This means to separate two people who get on well by going to see one of them behind the other's back to report what terrible things the second, whom the first cares so much for, has supposedly been saying about him or her. The worst instance of sowing discord is to cause conflict between members of a sangha. It is particularly serious to cause a rift between a teacher of the secret Mantrayana and his disciples, or among the circle of spiritual brothers and sisters. Yes, at all times we should make sure that we are not sowing discord in our communities. We should try not to turn people against each other, and we should be careful of what we say so as not to give off a bad impression of one person to another. As Patrul Rinpoche said, the gravest offense is splitting the Sangha, like Devadatta did to the Buddha Sangha. That should, by all means, be avoided. Number 6 is harsh speech. Harsh speech is, for instance, to make rude remarks about other people's unsightly physical flaws, openly calling them one-eyed, deaf, blind, and so on. It includes revealing others' hidden shortcomings, offensive talk of all kinds, and in fact, any words that make other people unhappy or uncomfortable, even if spoken sweetly rather than harshly. In particular, to speak offensively in front of one's teacher, a spiritual friend, or a holy being is a very grave error. Of course, we should avoid insulting others and criticizing them, but sometimes in jest, we can say things that end up hurting someone's feelings. People can be very sensitive in ways that we might not be aware of, and so we should avoid hurting them with our words by not speaking harshly or speaking thoughtlessly. Number 7, worthless chatter. Worthless chatter means talking a lot without any purpose. For example, reciting what one imagines to be the Dharma, but is not, such as the rites of Brahmins, or talking aimlessly about subjects that stir up attachment and hatred, like telling tales of telling tales of prostitutes, singing the bitterness songs, or discussing robbery and war, or anything that stirs up attachment or hatred. In particular, to disturb people's prayers or recitation by distracting them with a flood of useless words is especially harmful, since it prevents them from accumulating merit. Pieces of gossip that seem to have come up quite naturally and spontaneously are, for the most part, when you look more closely, motivated by desire or hatred. And the gravity of the fault will be in proportion to the amount of attachment or hatred created in your own or others' minds. While you are saying prayers or reciting mantras, mixing them with irrelevant talk will stop them from bearing any fruit, no matter how many you say. This applies especially to the different kinds of gossip that circulate along the rows of the gathered Sangha. One single gossip monger can cause the merit of a whole congregation to be spoiled, and the meritorious actions of its benefactors and patrons to be wasted. So this kind of speech is also known as idle chatter, and often we don't think about it much. For many, it's how we pass the time. However, it's important to take notice of what Patrul Rinpoche said about gossip mongers. Again, that a single gossip monger can cause the merit of a whole congregation to be spoiled. I, for one, didn't realize that the consequences of gossip could be so grave, but apparently they can be. Number 8, covetousness. Covetousness includes all the desirous or acquisitive thoughts, even the slightest ones we might have about other people's property or possessions. Contemplating how agreeable it would be if those wonderful belongings of theirs were ours, we imagine possessing them over and over again, invent schemes to get a hold of them, and so on. I think this is something that we're all familiar with from being young and having siblings through growing up. Cultivating covetousness, however, will increase our jealousy and harm our relationships. Instead, we should rejoice in the happiness and good fortune of others. Number 9, wishing harm on others. This refers to all the malicious thoughts we might have about other people. For example, brooding with hatred or anger about how we might harm them, feeling disappointed when they prosper or succeed, wishing they were less comfortable, less happy, or less talented, or feeling glad when unpleasant things happen to them. Right, so this reminds me of one of Longchenpa's 16 Dharma obstructing conditions, the one about enjoying harming others. Again, we see it identified here as something to be abandoned. But the irony is that wishing harm on others may or may not harm them, but it will certainly harm oneself. And then finally, number 10, wrong views. Wrong views include the view that actions cause no karmic effect and the views of eternalism and nihilism. According to the view that actions cause no karmic effect, positive actions bring no benefit, and negative actions no harm. Well, according to that view, that's what would result. The views of eternalism and nihilism include all the different views of the Tirthakas, which, although they can be divided into 360 false views or 62 wrong views, can be summed up in the 2 categories of eternalism and nihilism. Eternalists believe in a permanent self and an externally existing creator of the universe, such as Ishvara or Vishnu. Nihilists believe that all things just arise by themselves and that there are no past and no future lives, that there is no karma, no liberation, and no freedom. Sorry, I'm about to speak. Excuse me. So here we get a little bit of Buddhist philosophy, and while the names of the groups and the terms may get a little confusing, in sum, we should not teach people that what they do does not matter or that it has no effect, because nothing could be further from the truth. I'm wondering if we should pause and leave some time for Q&A at this point.
Yeah.
We have about 15 minutes. Yeah. Perhaps tomorrow we'll continue on with the experiences similar to the cause, which explains what type of results arise from engaging in the non-virtues. Just now we explained what exactly these non-virtues are. And then there's also an explanation of what results from engaging in these non-virtues and how that manifests in our present life. It gets detailed and specific about what those actions cause. I think it's important to hear that, just as His Holiness the Karmapa said, it's really helpful to have clear explanations of why things happen or why we should behave in certain ways, rather than just saying that we should. And then also, not to be so fire and brimstone, I also want to talk about positive actions that we should adopt and why we should adopt them. So maybe for here today, we'll pause and open it up to general Q&A, which we didn't have time for before. So are there any questions at this point?
There's one here online. What should a Buddhist do if they commit a grievous act and fall out of grace?
Well, as they say, the only good quality about non-virtues is that they can be confessed. So you can always confess. If you make a mistake, you confess it. So you admit that you did it. You cultivate the feeling of remorse and regret, and then you make the vow never to engage in that non-virtue again. So that then from that point, if you're sincere, that'll be the last time that you commit that non-virtue. That's what I would suggest. Oh, you can also do Vajrasattva purification practices. Um, and maybe you could also do some virtuous actions to help offset the harm that you did.
Someone asked, is it selfish to put ourselves first? Do you need elaboration on that? Is that clear?
Maybe a little elaboration might help.
XYZ piece, maybe can you say in what context you mean that? Putting yourself first? I know like a lot of people are dissuaded about hearing like teachings on hell. Like especially some new Buddhists have come and they're like, oh, I love Buddhism because there's no hell in Buddhism. But obviously they haven't been exposed to the teachings on the lower realms. How do you, I guess, just work with that, explaining that to people who are like receptive to the teachings of karma, cause, and effect, but because I don't know.
Well, I think they go hand in hand. So if someone's receptive to the teachings of karma, cause, and effect, then they have to believe that actions have results. And if you look at this world and you see people who are engaging in heinous misbehaviors and causing lots of harm, this has a result. So to deny that, I think, is kind of shutting your eyes to half of a pie. Like there's two sides to it. I think sometimes people like approach Buddhism with like rose-colored glasses, and they think that like it's full of positive things and doesn't have maybe all the negative things that their former religion had, like hell and things like that. But the truth is that actually, or they think that Buddhism is like open and easy and is not strict and is not dogmatic. But that's actually not true. Buddhism is really dogmatic and is really strict. But the difference is like the hell realm, for example, is temporary. You're not damned for like the rest of your life. There's always redemption, but you have to pay for the things that you do, or that everything you do has a result. And Buddhism gets really detailed about every single thing and what its result is. So I don't know if that helps as an answer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it helps to try to ignore things that are less than pleasant, because you have to know that experiencing that it has a cause and that you want to avoid the cause of that. I could try to answer the previous question about putting
Yeah.
oneself
Yeah.
first. Um, I think maybe the answer is mixed. It's like you have to care for yourself. If you don't care for yourself, then you will die, and then you can't really be of use to anybody, right? But that doesn't mean that you should fall to the extreme and then be very selfish at the expense of other people. So you have to find a balance where you're able to maintain a healthy life and also to be able to contribute and support other people.
There's one more here. Is all of the suffering we experience a result of our past actions?
I believe so. So that's why I'm kind of looking forward to sharing this part with you, called Experiences Similar to the Cause, where Patrul Rinpoche details how negative actions manifest. And each different type of negative action has a different type of manifestation in the present. And maybe I'll also try to prepare just to try to balance things out more. Um, the results of uh, positive actions as well. Yeah. But as was stated today in a couple of different parts, we don't remember the things that we did. So when we experience all types of things in this life and it doesn't look like there's any reason why we should have trouble or there should be challenges, um, that's where faith comes in. You have to have faith that there's actually a reason for it and that also it can be changed and that we can do things so that suffering doesn't continue. Um, and also, if we didn't, like they said, if we didn't experience a certain amount of suffering, then we also wouldn't try to find a remedy. So it's important that we have the experience of pain so we know that we want to avoid it.
Someone's asking, how can we best help those who we encounter who are caught up in the 8 worldly dharmas, 8 worldly concerns?
That's a good question. I guess my first question would be like, how receptive are they to the Dharma? Because as some of these, I think it was in one of the 16 conditions, uh, if a person doesn't find any flaws with samsara, then they have no interest to change it. So first off, does this person care or do you care and they don't care? Because if they don't care, then what are you going to do about it? If they do care and they don't like the suffering, then maybe you can try to propose ways to probably lessen the attachment they have to the particular thing so that they're not so invested in it. Um, let's see. Oh, yeah. So, like Teresa was saying, in terms of like hope for gain and fear of loss, if you have a friend who maybe is always thinking about amassing wealth because they always feel like there's such great scarcity, you can try to help remind them that there are people who live with far, far less money and also maybe are quite happy. And that also, that they, just reassure them that they are doing fine and that they're doing well and that there's no need for such like urgency. And maybe even remind them of like maybe times in their lives where they haven't had as much money and that they were okay. So maybe helping them to kind of like chill out a little bit, maybe one way.
I think I have a question. So I'm just curious, is being in delusion, like most, I'm saying most of the time, maybe I might be in delusion because I don't know any difference, you know. So is that the same as being, let me think of the word. I have trouble. I'm thinking of one of the glaciers here.
Ignorance.
How do you,
Attachment, aversion, ignorance, pride, and jealousy are the 5 that were listed.
ignorance is what I'm talking about. I'm so ignorant I can't think of it. No, is delusion and ignorance. Are they cousins? Are they the same? Is it like a ray of light, a ray of something, and they're in the same ray of that idea?
To me, I think delusion is a type of ignorance.
Say
I would say delusion is a type of ignorance.
a
If
type.
it falls under the category of ignorance.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about what I know I won't be able to repeat exactly, but what your father said about samsara is emptiness with a mind of delusion. Nirvana is emptiness with a mind with no delusion, right? Something like that.
Mhm.
Not exactly the same, but so I am a person that I don't know, I guess I fantasize or I can relate a lot to the vision of when we need to see the deity, how we vision that deity, how we see that deity. It's not, I mean, I don't see it exactly like the picture, but I can feel it. And yet also try to see it like Marukuru, right? So that is not a delusion, right? It's, that is faith in Dharmakaya.
This seems like a meditation practice. So I would say pretty much everything that we do in terms of practicing the Dharma is trying to help us or to guide us to the enlightened state of mind. So to say, like, is this deluded or not? I mean, I think it's like it's a supportive practice to help you give rise to positive mental states and to kind of elevate your mental state.
So let's say one of the things I admire so much about, especially your father, was that he was so practical. You know, I would ask him a question and think it was going to be this kind of elaborate, kind of spiritual answer, and he would come back with a super practical. This is the way it is, you know. If there's trouble, he told me once, he thought like some things are trouble. So he said, you can stay away from trouble. You don't have to go into trouble. To me, that's such a practical thing. So when I think of delusion, sometimes I'm not thinking about practicality. You know what I'm saying? I might think such and such is so wonderful, when in fact, it's not really wonderful. So let's say I might think trouble is wonderful, but I might not see it as trouble, right? In my mind, I might try to fantasize it like it was compassion or something like that. I'm just saying, how can we catch ourselves with fantasy in regard to seeing things, accepting things as being practical? I think that's one of the hardest things to do. I want impermanent not to be impermanent, and yet without impermanence, we wouldn't have this beautiful day. I mean, well, I would like it to be, we talk about stability. And so there's a certain place I can feel stability, but stability is not impermanent. I mean, it cannot be. It can be impermanent. It cannot be also can be stability, right?
You have a lot of thoughts. I guess I can respond to at least one of them, which is, I can try to respond, which is what to do about maybe thinking that something harmful is actually helpful, like a misunderstanding of something. I think the best way to avoid this would be through experience. So one would need to learn. So if you take something to be a positive thing, but you find that its result is actually negative, then I think learning from that, logging that information as like a record, and then moving on from there in the future to know that this might look this way, but actually the result ends up being harmful, then you've learned something. And so then you can move on with that knowledge and avoid a mistaking of something.
Been reading this book, the translation, Marco the Translator, and in the end of the book, his son is they talk about Mara, and his son falls into this Mara, falls into it because it looks like he's following what he feels he has to do, and yet what happens is that because of it, he loses the lineage.
Mm.
And I was just, that story really, I have to say, it kind of like, my mind is still boggled by how do we, hear this very, very trained, enlightened being is fooled by Mara. how, what he did, and it was clear, his father did not approve of what he was going to do. What he wanted to do did not seem to be anything negative. So he did it, and yet it was not according to what he should have done. So it just made me think a lot about, like, wow, like, whew, how this really high being could be so. And how many times do I do that? How many times do I hear something, an advice from some wise person, and I still think, this is still okay. But in fact, it probably might not be. How do we know?
Well, it's definitely good to question. So it's good to, if you feel like you have a suspicion that maybe you've misunderstood something, I think it's good to scrutinize that and to seek the advice of people we trust. So perhaps in that situation, if he really trusted his father and his father's perceptions, maybe it could have been different. I think we're past time.
Avoid trouble.
As best as you can.
Thank you so much. I hope I did.
So we're on page 7.
Sonam Vide Tamche Zebani Tomne Nyepe Jana Tamche Kegana Chebala Trupai Sipe Sole Droan Droan Sho Gewadi Kewoku Sonam Yeshe Zozote Sonam Yeshe Lejongwe Dampa Kuni Lopa Sho Janchu Semne Rinpoche Make Panam Ke Gyurji Ke Panyampa Me Padan Omne Kondu Pewa Sho Semchen Tamche Bedan Den Gyurji Ngendro Tamche Taku Tompa Sho Janchu Sempa Kanda Sachopa Deva Kunge Momam Droba Sho Sanchen Rike Tsen Dambe Kundu Shan Lulu Hengwai Sage Mejong Trebu Samam Chusi Chopan Kampe Tashi Sho.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.